I'm going to start today's video off with a definition. Merriam-Webster defines a cryptid as a creature or animal that people have claimed to exist but have never been proven to exist. Fallout 76 introduced many West Virginia cryptids as creature-type enemies in the Fallout universe. Local legends like the Wendigo, Snallygaster, and Grafton monster have their own place in not only the Fallout universe, but also in our real-world folklore. But Fallout 76 wasn't actually the first game to introduce cryptids to the world of Fallout. So today, I will explain every Fallout cryptid that has ever appeared or been mentioned in Fallout, as well as explain their real-world folklore, counterparts, what have you. Let's get started. Aliens. The first entry to this list is likely the biggest one too. Maybe. Yep. Aliens, I suppose, could technically be described as a cryptid. Many people, including myself, claim or believe that they exist, yet there's a surprising lack of physical evidence. This phenomenon is even described in science as the Fermi paradox, a lack of clear, obvious evidence, despite high estimates of existence. It's actually a really interesting rabbit hole to explore. Aliens made their first appearance in Fallout 1 through the alien ship Special Encounter. The remains of two alien creatures are found alongside a crashed spaceship. Since, aliens have made consistent appearances throughout the franchise, and were actually, for better or for worse, canonized in the Fallout 3 DLC Mothership Zeta. Before Zeta, aliens were only ever seen in special or random encounters, most of which are deemed non-canon due to their randomness. Zeta changed this, dedicating a full DLC to the lone survivor's abduction by a group of Zetan aliens. In our real world, the most common depiction of aliens is the three-word description, little green men. Believe it or not, the phrase little green men wasn't actually used to describe aliens at first. Originating in the early 1900s, it was more commonly used to describe imaginary mythical creatures like goblins before it described aliens. However, by the 1950s, little green men was often used sarcastically to describe the occupants of a flying saucer. Crazy how some words and phrases catch on. More recently, some form of aliens can be found predominantly in science fiction and fantasy media. While they don't always take on the appearance of little green men, fictional universes like Star Wars or Star Trek are littered with dozens of various alien races. Though I suppose that Yoda could technically be described as a little green man. Ghosts. I love ghosts. Ghost stories, ghost movies, ghost video games. They're interesting. Something about the paranormal fascinates me. How does one explain the unexplainable? As far as I know, there have been 2 confirmed ghost sightings throughout the entire wasteland, Anna Winslow and Lucy Grantchester. Anna Winslow appears to the Chosen One in the frontier town of The Den. Her spirit is trapped in the earthly realm after small-time chem dealer Joey stole her locket. The Chosen One can help Anna return to the spirit realm by returning her locket back to her. As for the second ghost sighting, Lucy Grantchester, her tale is one filled with tragedy. I've made a video about it before, but it might be a bit dated. Long story short, Lucy killed her parents, was placed in a mental institution, proceeded to escape, and unalived herself in the attic of her childhood home. Lucy Grantchester appears to the sole survivor as they approach the dilapidated home, now a haunted attraction, the Grantchester Mystery Mansion. She can be seen standing in one of the windows as well as running throughout the house as the sole survivor traverses the haunted house. Now, the concept of a ghost has been around for centuries. Many Mesopotamian religions make references to ghosts. Ghosts were thought to be created at the time of death, taking on the deceased person's memories and personality. They traveled to the netherworld, were assigned a position, like a job, and existed in similar ways to that of the living. Living relatives were expected to make offerings to ease the conditions that the ghost was experiencing. If no offerings were made, then the ghost could inflict illnesses and hardships upon the living. In a more contemporary context, the belief system of spiritualism gained ground in the United States from the 1840s to the 1920s. This was the idea that spirits in the spirit world could be contacted by people known as mediums, which could then provide information on the afterlife and whatnot. And while spiritualism receives, as many other religions and beliefs do, a great amount of scrutiny from skeptics and cynics, it is still practiced in many English-speaking nations such as the United States and United Kingdom. Flatwoods Monster. Now we've gotten into some of the Fallout 76 cryptids. As these ones are quite a bit more obscure than just aliens and ghosts, I expect this will be a bit more interesting. The Flatwoods monster is a deformed Zaytan alien fitted with a sort of rocket-powered suit that helps it move around. Its ghastly appearance has caused some to confuse it with a ghost of some sorts. The monster is capable of regenerating health, commanding other creatures through some form of mind control, and is able to teleport around to avoid detection and threats. Its presence was known pre-war, but at the time it was deemed a silly hoax crafted by a man named Colton Pickens. Early one morning, Deputy Walton was called to the scene after reports came in of a naked man yelling atop a hot dog stand. Walton arrested the man, Colton Pickens, and began an interview with him. Colton explained that he was taking out the trash one night when he saw a light shining from the woods. At first, he thought it was just a hunter, but then the light started to change, alternating between the colors blue, green, and red. Then, all of a sudden, Colton grew dizzy and collapsed. Looking up, he saw what he described as a gray-skinned figure with huge black eyes wearing a spacesuit. It told him to board his spaceship without uttering a single word. It's at this time, tired of hearing about Colton's silly story, that Deputy Walton arrested him for drunk and disorderly conduct and indecent exposure. The interview was done. In actual West Virginia folklore, the Flatwoods monster was an entity that was reported to have been seen in Flatwoods after a bright object crossed the sky on September 12, 1952. At 7:15 p.m., 4 friends, Edward May, Fred May, Neil Nunley, and Tommy Heyer, were all playing on the lawn of Flatwoods Elementary when they saw a bright light streak across the sky and land on the property of a local farmer. The boys went to investigate what they saw in the sky and stopped along their way to get their mother, Kathleen. Kathleen May would call up National Guardsman Eugene Lemon, and together with the family dog Richie, the group would go to the farm to investigate. There, they claimed to see a red, pulsing light. When they shined their flashlight at the light, they saw a 10-foot tall creature with a head shaped like a spade and a dark metal dress. Its hands were twisted and clawed, and its eyes were an eerie orange color. It appeared to be levitating off the ground. There was a strange, sickening mist in the air. The creature then hissed and glided quickly towards the group before they turned and fled in terror. After their experiences with the unknown creature, a few members of the group suffered from throat irritation, vomiting, and nausea. These symptoms lasted for a few days. Kathleen and Eugene reported the incident to local authorities, but nothing turned up. Not long after the first sighting of the Flatwoods monster, another creature sighting was reported. Audra Harper and her friends were taking a shortcut through a forest to a nearby store when Harper saw a ball of fire on a hill. She initially dismissed it, thinking that one of her neighbors were fox chasing. However, when she turned back, the fire had disappeared, and instead a tall, dark silhouette of a man-shaped figure took its place. Terrified, the group ran. Another sighting occurred the day after the first on September 13th, about 20 miles south of Flatwoods. One night, George and Edith Snidowski were driving through a rural area when their car suddenly died on a deserted road. When George attempted to restart the car, a foul, sulfurous smell filled the air. A bright light flashed, and the couple were met with a 10-foot tall creature hovering in front of the car. The creature, this time, was lacking its spade-shaped hood and appeared reptilian and bony. It dragged its claw across the hood of the car before drifting into the woods. Once the monster had passed the tree line, the couple's car started back up, and they sped away. And that is the real-world tale of the Flatwoods monster. I guess between real life and Fallout, both creatures share their cosmic origins, as it seems that the Flatwood monster from real life came down from the sky, and Fallout's monster is an alien. The Grafton monster. In Fallout, the Grafton monster is the product of an FEV experiment at West Tech's Huntersville location. Using FEV strain FEVS006458, on October 23, 2077, scientists were able to create a stable mutation, a headless, hairless, gray-ish, leathered beast standing at around 7.5 feet tall. The beast was sedated and put in a truck to be transported off-site, but before it could reach its new destination, nuclear hellfire rained down in the cataclysmic event known as the Great War. Pre-war, the Grafton monster folklore existed as evident by the Tales from the West Virginia Hills holotape and magazine series and the Grafton Day Parade, though not much else is known. Now, as for real life, the Grafton monster was first sighted by Grafton Sentinel reporter Robert Cockrell in 1964. On June 16th at around 11 p.m., Cockrell was driving home from work on Route 119 along the Tygart River. It was then that Cockrell saw a large, white entity along the side of the road. Cockrell slowed his car to take a better look. That's when he noticed the beast was huge and appeared to be made of entirely muscle with white, seal-like fur. It was only when the monster moved that Cockrell realized it was alive. In response, he quickly drove away. The next day, Cockrell told his editor about the sighting, who quickly dismissed it. But where his employer didn't seem to care too much, the rest of the town did. Cockrell's friends told as much of the town as possible about the beast, and in no time, several monster hunting parties were formed. It didn't take long before over 20 or more sightings of the Grafton monster were reported. However, just as interest in the beast grew fast, so too was it dismissed. Concerned about the large number of weaponized monster hunters, the Grafton police began their own investigation. And on June 19th, 3 days after Cockrell's initial sighting, the Grafton Sentinel published an article dismissing the monster sightings as a result of spring fever and boredom among the locals. Now what's cool is that unlike the Flatwoods monster, it would seem that both the folklore's depiction of the Grafton monster and Fallout's depiction are nearly identical. A leathery white, headless, hulking beast. The Mega Sloth. Okay, so this one is a bit weird, but bear with me. Isaac Garahan, son of Vivian Garahan of Garahan mining fame, wasn't too interested in the family business. He instead liked to spend his time with his pet sloths. After the Great War, his pets escaped, and likely due to radiation exposure or what have you, grew to mega status. Now, while the megalonic sloth was native to North America, that was over 11,000 years ago. How does it qualify as a cryptid if we can confirm its existence and extinction? Well, there have been reports and sightings of a giant sloth in West Virginia as recent as 2013. How is it possible that an extinct creature still roams today? That is why it makes this list. On July 18, 2013, a creature dubbed the Virginia Slothfoot was caught on Roger Williams' trail camera. Williams believed the creature was just a young bear with a skin disease, as he noted that he's hunted in the area for years and never found any trace of an unknown animal before. However, a blog suggested the creature was actually a giant ground sloth. It definitely looks pretty weird if it is a bear. Mothman. Ah, the Mothman, one of the most popular cryptids on this list, I'd wager. And also one of the only cryptids on this list to maintain its original folklore. In Fallout, the Mothman was a mythical creature described as a half-man, half-moth entity that stalked the area around Point Pleasant. The sensation around the creature created a large following, from casual fans of the creature to cryptid hunters to conspiracy theorists. The legend of the Mothman led to a number of tourist attractions, including the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant. And while the creature's folklore was deemed as just a fun hobby for most, and didn't garner interest from the scientific community, a secret cult began to form. The cult of the Mothman worshipped the mythical being. As an impending nuclear threat was on the horizon, the group attempted to commune with the creature, hoping that the being could provide shelter from the global threat. On October 22, 2077, the Mothman appeared to one follower, Brother Charles. Charles told his comrades about the Mothman's parting words, speaking about an apocalyptic flood that would happen the following day. However, Charles also received a vision from a purple-eyed Mothman later the same day, and used the creature's wisdom to guide his followers to the Lucky Hole mine instead. Presented with conflicting statements from what appeared to be a single Mothman, some chose to stand on their roofs, while others sought the shelter of the mine. Come the Great War, only those who followed Charles into the mine survived. From here, the cult of the Mothman split into two, the dim ones and the enlightened, each worshipping a different eye-colored Mothman, red and purple respectively. And that's essentially the Fallout lore for the Mothman. Now, much of it is shared between real life and Fallout, except for the cult of the Mothman bit. On November 15, 1966, two couples from Point Pleasant told police that they saw a large gray creature whose eyes glowed red when the car's headlights picked them up. They described it as a large flying man with 10-foot wings and following their car as they were driving. In the coming days, police received several more reported sightings. Two volunteer firefighters described it as a large bird with red eyes. From here, the legend only grew. Several people connected the collapse of the Silver Bridge in 1967, which killed 46 people, to the Mothman, including a 1975 book about the beast. A movie based on the book would later be released in 2002. Point Pleasant, in an attempt to draw more tourism to their town, would host their first annual Mothman Festival in 2002. This tradition would continue, bringing 10 to 12,000 people to the town every third weekend in September. In 2016, an alleged photo of the creature was published by WCHS-TV, Charleston's local television network. And that is the legend of the Mothman. Sheep Squatch. I feel like I can't really talk about the Sheep Squatch without first addressing the Sasquatch. Although no Sasquatch appears in Fallout, the famed story of a large bipedal ape-like creature exists in the game's universe. The April edition of Backwoodsman magazine features the phrase, "hardy as a Sasquatch," providing evidence, albeit very little evidence, that at least the average pre-war Fallout citizen would have heard of Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. Many North American indigenous cultures shared tales and legends of mysterious hair-covered creatures that lived in forests. These stories existed for a lot longer than our contemporary version of Bigfoot. Petroglyphs at Painted Rock in Tulare County, California depicts a group of Bigfoot called the Family. More recently is the famous 911 call of a homeowner concerned about a large subject in all black having entered his backyard. While Bigfoot appears in less and less pop culture, it's still one of the most recognizable cryptids, at least in North America. A similar creature, the Sheep Squatch, appears as an enemy creature in Fallout 76. Pre-war, a group known as the Truth Seekers dedicated themselves to investigating possible creature sightings around Appalachia. High school friends Calvin Van Lowe, Scott Conroy, and Ray Gary founded this group. They held weekly meetings discussing possible cryptid sightings, though many would be resolved as nothing out of the ordinary. A monster was mistaken for a cart of laundry, or an albino bear. When Calvin started school at Vault-Tec University, he would excuse himself from the group, dedicating that time to his studies instead. Following his eventual graduation, Calvin would be hired by Beisch Company and be tasked with engineering products for the company from a secret lab in the basement of his sister's taxidermy business. One of his projects involved developing false rumors and sightings of the infamous Sheep Squatch. The goal was to stir up public concern, causing land prices to drop so that Beisch could buy out the area. Calvin was provided with 2 Assaultron units to make this happen. Believing sheep squatches to be real from his truth seeker days, Calvin decided the best way to go about accomplishing this task would be to create a fake girl sheep squatch, initiate some sort of mating ritual to lure a real boy sheep squatch, and then capture it so that he could eventually release it, I guess. Bit of a janky plan, Calvin, but you do you. Anyway, as you may have guessed, this backfired. The imposter sheep squatch would escape Calvin's lab, maiming him in the process. Unbeknownst to Calvin, whether it be one of God's unholy creations, or a product of a mutation caused by the Great War, real sheep squatches seem to exist, posing as an enemy in the wasteland. As for real life, the sheep squatch, or the White Thing, have been described as a woolly white beast. Most of its reported sightings come from the southwestern regions of West Virginia. As far as I know, the first reported sighting of a sheep squatch was in 1994, when a former Navy seaman saw a white beast exit the forest to drink water from a creek. He watched the beast for a while before it ducked back into the brush. Later that year, 2 children reported seeing a large white bear stand on its hind legs. Startled by the children, the beast ran off into the nearby forest. More recently, in 2015, a group of campers near Folks Run claimed to have seen a beast that was nearly 10 feet tall, crouching at the top of a hill. The beast began to run in the direction of the campers, crossing the river that separated the campers and the beast. When it emerged from the water, the campers claimed it looked like a bipedal dog. Before the sheep squatch could continue its charge, a loud screech was heard, momentarily paralyzing the creature. The sheep squatch whimpered before running in the direction opposite of the noise. It's unknown today what made that screech. And that's sort of it for the sheep squatch. Outside of being the featured topic in an episode of a monster hunting show called Monsters and Mysteries in America, it's just a local cryptid with not a whole lot of pop culture recognition. Snallygaster. The Snallygaster might be the most different between Fallout 76 and American folklore. In Fallout, the Snallygaster is the offspring of an FEV mutant. On October 14, 2077, a week or so before the Great War, at the Appalachian West Tech location, FEV strain FEVS006443 produced a successful mutant. According to scientists, the mutant was disturbing, but it provided valuable insights into what the first evolutionary virus could achieve. The mutant had several eyeballs along its upper chest, a second set of arms that ended in clawed fingers, and a large sickle-shaped claw on each inner toe. Unlike many failed mutations, this one was able to sustain itself. It didn't need additional life support to survive. As such, it was planned to be released into the town of Huntersville for observation once it fully matured. However, before it and the nearby town could be subject to experimentation, the Great War would happen. The mutant would manage to escape the West Tech Research Center a few months later in January 2078. Free from its confines, it was able to reproduce and create what we now know as the Snallygaster. In folklore, tales of a Schnellergeist, or quick ghost in German, spread around Frederick County, Maryland by German immigrants in the 1730s. They claimed they were being terrorized by a beast described as half reptile, half bird, with a metallic beak, razor-sharp teeth, and octopus-like tentacles. It was rumored to swoop down, silently snatch up its unsuspecting victims, and fly off to find somewhere to drain the victim's blood. In February and March 1909, newspapers reported encounters between locals and a beast with enormous wings, a long pointed bill, claws like steel hooks, and an eye in the center of its forehead. Its screeches were described as a locomotive whistle. These reports were so infamous that the Smithsonian offered a reward for its hide, and that US President Theodore Roosevelt reportedly considered postponing a trip to Africa to hunt the beast personally. But as it turned out, these newspaper reports were hoaxes constructed by the company to drive up readership. More recently, however, the Snallygaster has gained some more cult popularity. Author Patrick Boyton published a book on the history of the Snallygaster in 2008. J.K. Rowling incorporated the Snallygaster in the Harry Potter universe through her Fantastic Beasts spin-off. An annual beer festival called Snallygaster was started in Washington, D.C. in 2011, and in 2021, a cryptozoologist in Maryland opened the American Snallygaster Museum in Libertytown, Maryland. Who would have thunk a creature first reported in the 1700s would become so popular today? Wendigo. The Wendigo is probably my favorite cryptid on this list. I remember fighting Earl Williams for the first time, and man oh man, that was an adventure. So creepy, freaky, and fun. In Fallout, the origins of the Wendigo are still a bit of a mystery. What we do know is that they are some sort of a humanoid mutant. There are 4 named Wendigos, and each of their post-human transformations involved the act of consuming human flesh. There's Morris Stevens, the progenitor Wendigo. He was the former leader of the cannibal raider faction, the Gormons. He was exiled from the group after being caught consuming another Gormond member, breaking their strict rules. He and his wife Edie Stevens would take up shelter in a cave where Morris's cravings worsened, and eventually leading him to consuming his own wife, and later transforming into the progenitor Wendigo. Then there's Camp Counselor Nia. Nia was a former Pioneer Scout counselor at Camp Adams. Nia began seeing strange things in the stars, and when one of her campers vanished, she ventured into the night alone, trying to figure out what exactly was going on. During this solo expedition, she was somehow transformed into a Wendigo and began stalking the other campers at Camp Adams. Then there's Scott Conroy. Remember Calvin Van Lowe's Truth Seekers? Well, Scott Conroy was one of them. After failing to find evidence of a sheep squatch, Scott resorted to ghost hunting. His pursuit of the paranormal led him to the sunken church, where he would find himself falling into a sinkhole. A sinkhole at the sunken church? Who would have thought? Anywho, Scott was now trapped in the sinkhole after the fall broke both his legs. By day 2 of being stuck, another unlucky soul fell in. Kevin, a park ranger, was now keeping Scott company. This boosted Scott's morale as Kevin taught him a whole bunch of stuff about survival. Kevin promised that people from his park ranger division would be searching the area any day now. But unbeknownst to both, while in the sinkhole, humanity and Earth were ravaged by nuclear destruction. 3 weeks later, Scott writes that he's going to die down here. Not much else would come until 2 weeks later when another person fell in, Mickey. Mickey said he was a part of a gang of chefs. In reality, he was a part of the Gormons. Yep, those Gormons. An indiscernible amount of time later, Mickey killed Kevin, and the pair would eat him. Sometime later, Scott would eat Mickey too. By 2103, a Wendigo named Scott Conroy can be found stalking the sunken church. And the last named Wendigo is the Wendigo Colossus, Earl Williams. Earl was a miner in the Monongah mine. When Horner Industrial announced that they would replace all human miners with their auto miners, many folks of Appalachia were rightfully mad. Those miners living in the Monongah Township decided to enact some revenge by stealing a bunch of stuff from the mine. However, while they were looting the mine, mining supervisor Deke Sykes would blow up the entrance to the mine, trapping the angered miners. I think I just said mine like 40 times in that last sentence. With no other option, the miners would begin to eat the bodies of those who died in the explosion or those who starved to death that refused to commit cannibalism. By 2103, no miners were left. The only thing inhabiting the depths of the Monongah mine is a massive Wendigo named Earl Williams. Before I begin, there's a lot of contention surrounding the subject of Wendigos. This mostly revolves around its portrayal in Western media, including Fallout. From reading many wikis, articles, and 2 published journals, I've learned a lot. I'll do my best to be sensitive on the subject while also being concise and informative. The misappropriation of the Wendigo could probably be its own video, but I shouldn't be and won't be the one to make it. Anywho, in folklore, the description of a Wendigo varies wildly depending on the culture. Though many view the Wendigo as a malevolent, cannibalistic, supernatural being that is strongly associated with winter, the north, coldness, famine, and starvation. An Ojibwe teacher from Ontario describes the Wendigo as gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. The Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, unclean, and suffering from suppuration of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. In some traditions, it would seem that Fallout took inspiration from these. Wendigos are created when a human resorts to cannibalism in order to survive. In other traditions, the Wendigo is merely a concept, a lesson against greed and excessive consumption. Someone is said to be possessed by the Wendigo spirit when they seek to unravel and destroy the ecological balance around them. Now, this is where the contention and appropriation I mentioned before comes in. In pop culture, the Wendigo has unfortunately taken on its own version, separate from original indigenous sources. One of the first appearances of a character inspired or named after a Wendigo in non-indigenous literature is Algernon Blackwood's 1910 novella, The Wendigo. Blackwood's work received well-placed criticism as his depiction of the Wendigo is used as a stand-in in order to describe indigenous people as savages. What was once a piece of Native American culture was now being used to discriminate against them. And unfortunately, Blackwood's work and template for the Wendigo would end up being the inspiration for many other horror fiction creators. Blackwood inspired August Derleth's The Thing That Walked on the Wind and Ithaca, which then inspired Stephen King's Pet Sematary. In turn, Stephen King's work would become the template for later portrayals of the Wendigo. These depictions of the Wendigo have led to many claims of cultural appropriation. Non-indigenous creators are taking a piece of indigenous culture, stripping it of its original cultural context, and then transforming it into a relatable monster for a Western audience. Francesca Johnson writes in her A Creature Without a Cave article, "The use of the Wendigo is problematic in the horror genre as it presents an indigenous antagonist that poses a threat to white culture for its otherness and indigeneity, while at the same time misappropriating, discarding, and demonizing the indigenous culture the myth comes from. I encourage you to do your own further research into the accurate representation of the Wendigo from various indigenous cultures, but that's an overview for the Wendigo, how it's described in Algonquin folklore, and how it's presented in Western media. On to the next. The Beast of Beckley. In Fallout, the Beast of Beckley is a notorious and dangerous albino wolf. Husband and wife Raymond and Janelle Priblos were interested in the beast. The pair owned and operated Priblos' Curios, a shop specializing in selling merchandise related to Appalachian cryptids. The pair wished to capture and kill the beast with the hope of selling it to cryptid hunter Calvin Van Lowe. Despite Janelle's many warnings, Raymond opted to walk around its cave with some bait and was ultimately killed by the beast. Janelle, wanting revenge for her husband's death, decided to hunt down the beast herself, and too was ultimately killed. In 2103, the Vault Dweller from 76 can task themselves with finding out what happened to Janelle and Raymond Priblos after finding their missing poster at one of several locations. This leads them to tracking down and killing the Beast of Beckley themselves. Now, as for the legend of the Beast of Beckley, I admit I had a hard time finding something that related to the cryptid in real life. I found 2 articles that seemed somewhat related, even if loosely, to a creature similar to the Fallout universe's Beckley Beast. One described a tall black creature with 4 yellow eyes and sharp teeth patrolling the woods near Beckley. It was a hulking 6-foot-tall humanoid beast that didn't really do much but roar, stare at people, and run away. Now, outside of the name, I'll admit that it's not really anything similar to Fallout's Beast of Beckley. Even in the editor's notes, they claim that it was the first time that they've heard of a four-eyed creature that stalked the woods around Beckley. As for the second article, it told the tale of a predator killing livestock at the coal camp of Fireco in the 1930s. One witness described it as 10 feet long and powerful enough to snatch the heads of fully grown hogs. It could rip up clumps of earth that weighed more than 50 pounds. In 1992, nearly 60 years after initial sightings, some claimed that something strange had still been going on in the area. Children were warned to stay away from the area lest they want to chance an encounter with the beast. In 2022, Scott Worley, a local legends historian, shared a story of an encounter that two visitors to Fireco had with the beast. So, I guess a pool room was recently opened in the old ghost town, and two people were traveling from Beckley to Fireco to play in a pool tournament. Having never been to Fireco before, they got lost. While traveling the backwoods trying to get their bearings again, they saw a creature cross the road and disappear into a wooded area. They said it was unlike any creature they knew, standing about 3 feet tall with a large head and gleaming, gnarled teeth. And while this beast was dubbed the Fireco Monster, it seems to share the predatory nature and characteristics that the legendary albino wolf of Fallout 76 would have. Chupacabra. Very similar to that of the Sasquatch, and coincidentally the rest of this list, the Chupacabra doesn't actually make an appearance in Fallout, but we know that at least the legend of the Chupacabra exists in the Fallout universe, as Nobark Noonan calls an invisible nightkin a Chupacabra after it had killed some Brahmin around Novak. Chupacabra means goat sucker in Spanish. The first reported attack attributed to Chupacabras came in March 1995. 8 sheep in Puerto Rico were discovered dead. Each had 3 puncture wounds and were reportedly completely drained of their blood. A few months later, Madeline Tolentino reported seeing the creature in the town of Canovanas, where as many as 150 farm animals and pets were reportedly killed. Shortly after these reported incidents, other animal deaths were reported in several other countries. The most common description of the Chupacabra is that of a reptile-like creature with leathery or scaly skin, with sharp spines or quills running down its back. It's said to stand about 3 or 4 feet tall and hops in a similar fashion to that of a kangaroo. Another common description is that it looks like a strange wild dog. It's hairless with a pronounced spinal ridge, eye sockets, fangs, and claws. Its popularity has resulted in the beast making an appearance in several types of media. This includes Futurama, The X-Files, and even has its own Magic the Gathering card, the Ravenous Chupacabra. Jackalope. The jackalope only ever appears in Fallout twice. Once as the sign for Priblos' Curios in Appalachia, and once on a Fallout 2 holodisc of Vice President Daniel Byrd's word list. Yeah, quite odd, I know. The jackalope is described as a jackrabbit, but with antelope horns. The word jackalope, in case you are wondering or didn't notice, is a mix of jackrabbit and antelope. Easy peasy. While depictions of the jackalope appear worldwide and date back to the 13th century, the American jackalope was popularized by taxidermists Douglas Herrick and his brother in the 1930s. They'd grafted deer antlers onto a jackrabbit carcass and sold the combination to a local hotel in Douglas, Wyoming. From here, popularity only grew, with jackalopes appearing in stories, poems, shows, games, movies, logos, and what have you. A bill in Wyoming to make the jackalope the state's official mythical creature was even considered. That's absolutely wild to me. Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness Monster must have the least interesting Fallout tie-in of all the creatures thus far. A terminal in H&H Tools tells the story of an employee that couldn't attend a weekend event because they had to partake in a play recounting the life of St. Columba and they had to work the Loch Ness Monster puppet. No cool monster sighting, no integrated quest, just a terminal entry about a play that had a Loch Ness Monster puppet. In real life, the name, the Loch Ness Monster, or Nessie, started from a news article about a man named George Spicer's alleged sighting of the creature in 1933. However, the earliest report of a monster near Loch Ness appeared in the Life of St. Columba by Andamnan, written in 6th century AD. According to the author, an Irish monk named St. Columba was staying in the land of the Picts with his companions when he encountered a few local residents burying a man by the river Ness. The men said that the deceased was swimming in the river when he was attacked by a beast who mauled him. Over 1,000 years later, in the early 1870s, a man reportedly saw an object resembling a log or upturned boat wriggling and churning up the water, moving slowly before rapidly disappearing. In 1888, a mason sighted a large, stubby-legged animal surfacing from the loch. He said it looked like a salamander. In 1934 came the infamous surgeon's photograph, arguably the most recognizable and popular image of Nessie. It is reportedly the first photo of the creature's head and neck. According to the photographer, he was looking at the loch when he saw the monster, grabbed his camera, and took 4 photos. Only 2 of these photos came out clearly. The first was the surgeon's photograph, and the second was a bit too blurry. For 60 years, the image was used to prove the beast's existence, but by 1994, most agreed it was just an elaborate hoax. After having been publicly ridiculed by his employer, the Daily Mail, after some Loch Ness monster footprints he found had been discovered to have been a hoax, Marmaduke Wetherill plotted his revenge. Using a toy submarine and some wood putty, Wetherill and his co-conspirators snapped some staged fake photos. Wetherill then gave the photos to a friend of his, who then, as part of the prank, proceeded to claim them as his own, saying he saw the monster in the loch, grabbed his camera, and took 4 photos. And even though the surgeon's photograph was found to be a hoax, plenty of other images, videos, and eyewitness accounts have since come out, keeping the true existence of a Loch Ness monster unknown. Skinwalker. And the last on this list of cryptids is the Skinwalker. Unlike the Loch Ness monster, this entry has one of the coolest Fallout tie-ins. The Dead Horses tribe, yeah? They're a post-war tribe living in Zion by 2281. Their members were originally from Rez, a place east of the Grand Canyon. They have their own language, yeah? Well, the Dead Horse language was a result of the mixing of languages of those living and visiting the Rez when the Great War began. It is a unique combination of English, German, and Navajo. When a Dead Horse member loses track of a person in-game, they sometimes shout, "Ye nad lo shi." In Navajo, the word for a skinwalker is Ye nad lushi. Do you see where I'm going with this? The only appearance or use of the term skinwalker in Fallout is from a generic dialogue in another fictional language that is based on non-fictional languages that an NPC uses when they've lost track of their target in combat in a random DLC. How freaking cool is that? I didn't even know that before I started my research for this video. Like, what a random piece of trivia. That is so cool. Anyway, the Skinwalker is from Navajo culture. It is a type of witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. They represent the antithesis of Navajo cultural values, where community healers are seen as good, witches, including skinwalkers, are seen as evil. And as with the topic of the Wendigo, the cultural significance and background of the Skinwalker has been often misappropriated by Western media, often being portrayed as relatable monsters. Cherokee Nation activist Adrian Keene wrote in response to non-Navajos incorporating Navajo legends into their writing. We as Navajo people are now opened up to a barrage of questions about these beliefs and traditions, but these are not things that need or should be discussed by outsiders at all. I'm sorry if that seems unfair, but that's how our cultures survive. And I will take that as my cue to end the video. That is 15 Fallout cryptids explained, their in-game lore and appearances, their out-of-game real-world origins, descriptions, and legacy. If you liked the video, be sure to share and subscribe. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
Colton Pickens, I'm arresting you for drunken disorderly conduct and indecent exposure.
Indecent what? What are you talking about? I didn't do anything wrong.
Colton, I found you on the roof of your shack, buck naked, yelling at the top of your lungs. Your blood alcohol was .23. It took 4 deputies to get you into handcuffs. We all go on a bender now and then, but you need to keep it at home.